My name is Adam Calo. I'm a researcher in the Social, Economic, and Geographical Sciences group at the James Hutton Institute, and also one of the Landscape Decisions Program Fellows. In this video, I'll present the concepts behind my fellowship proposal, which is titled The Role of Property, Ownership, and Land Tenure on Landscape Decision Making, the Case of Scotland's Low-Carbon Farming Policies. One of the stated aims of the Landscape Decisions Program is to deliver better evidence-based decisions within UK landscapes. The starting point of my fellowship project is to engage critically with this aim by asking the following questions. Who has the power to make decisions on land? And how is this power shaped, legitimized, and contested? In some of my previous work, I studied how farmers who face restricted land access barriers are ultimately constrained in their ability to make radically different agricultural decisions, even if they aspired to practice alternative forms of farming. In the end, formal and informal land tenure relations acted as a membrane that filtered out many of the efforts to encourage, nudge, cajole, or mandate behavior change in the agricultural sector. Consider an example of a farmer on an informal lease, something that amounts to a handshake agreement. What power do they have to make long-term management decisions on the land? Even if they do decide to make changes, they're probably the least likely to derive the benefits from that decision because they don't own the resource. In turn, if it is the landowner who decides to take land management in a new direction, what happens to the tenant farmer then? These are questions of the norms, both social and legal, of how our societies structure entitlements over land and its resources. These are questions of property and access, as well as how different actors gain the authority to back up these relations. Therefore, I'd argue that understanding how property is formed and used and reformed plays a central role in a holistic understanding of landscape decision making. I am certain that the LDP will generate new convincing forms of evidence, all of which will point to a variety of positive outcomes that alternative landscape decisions may bring about. What I'm interested in is how these decision-making frameworks work with or conflict with existing property and land tenure dynamics, which I see as the true forces that ultimately ground who has agency to take action on land. Thus, any new framework for using land assets will benefit from a deep look at how these assets are controlled, as well as efforts to reform such consolidation. In this way, the first high-level goal of the project is to stimulate thinking on the role of land tenure relations on landscape decision-making across the variety of the program's approaches. Consider some of the proposed modeling work. How might the complexity of land tenure be accounted for in these models? Can land tenure be described as a discrete category for quantitative analysis? If the complexity of land tenure relations can't be incorporated into such efforts, how might the results of predictive modeling entrench, challenge, or underestimate the existing property dynamics in the authority contained therein? What would be needed to align predictions and recommendations from new assessments of the land's assets with the social and political forces bound up in land tenure dynamics? At first glance, I argue that some land tenure regimes are more suitable for certain land use behavior change than others. This has important implications for what is likely to change, who is likely to be targeted for land use policy interventions, and who might be left out of such efforts. The second goal of my proposal is to test this argument through empirical work to understand how seemingly distinct tenure regimes in Scotland contend with the forthcoming low-carbon farming initiatives as part of the Net Zero 2045 target. Recently, the Scottish Government announced a £40 million agricultural transformation program, a yet ambiguously defined effort to ramp up climate change mitigation in the agricultural sector. Given this policy objective and forthcoming mandates and incentive programs associated with it, I'm curious how land tenure influences the adoption, rejection, or contestation of the low-carbon farming framework. I plan to conduct research across a variety of agricultural land tenure regimes, each considering how they might meet this mandate of mitigating emissions through a change in their agricultural practices. Because land tenure is wrapped up in the legal aspects of such things like property law, lease agreements, zoning policy, and land reform implementation. I'm drawing from the methods of legal geography, which offers a technique for exploring how laws have a way of reorganizing space, as well as how space tends to shape the legal imagination. This work will involve qualitative research across a variety of sites, with a focus on the underlying laws, legal arguments, and policies related to property, and the way land managers experience, adapt to, and contest these legal dimensions. I'll seek to uncover how a certain landscape decision change objective, in this case a move to low carbon farming, interacts with the diversity of land tenure regimes in Scotland. Scotland is a particularly unique site for this research because of its tenure diversity, including community ownership, crofting tenure, an emerging regional land use planning initiative, and an array of specific agricultural tenancy rules. It's also one of the few places in the so-called global north where land reform is on the policy agenda. I hope that this work will provide specific evidence for how land tenure mediates the goal of low carbon farming in Scotland and across the UK. This work should also lend itself to the goal of creating a holistic approach to landscape decision making. This is because if we know how land tenure regimes align with certain consensus land use decision objectives, policymakers and community stakeholders might be able to better co-construct the kinds of tenure systems that are indeed optimal for changes to land use they wish to see. This could mean the championing of existing tenure systems, reforming tenure laws ill-suited for evidence-based decision-making, or designing new tenure systems in concert with new decision-making frameworks. My proposal is grounded by two constituent LDP projects, both operating in Scotland. These projects will provide opportunities for knowledge co-construction, entree into potential research sites, and a ready network of a diversity of actors to engage throughout the project regarding the role of land tenure on decision making. Finally, one of the ways I hope to work with multiple LDP projects across the themes is by launching a podcast series on landscape science that will feature the work of LDP projects. I plan to produce 2 seasons, first engaging in some of the high-level and contested concepts that frame landscape research across disciplines. The second season is designed to feature the empirical work that comes out of the projects. So if you're interested in working with me to produce a podcast episode that features key questions for landscape decision-making or an especially rich narrative coming out of the research, please do get in touch. Thank you.